Hello, this is Strat-edgy and welcome to episode 2 of Strat-edgy Designs, where I talk about design concepts through player-driven stories. I want to start this video with Isaac Newton. In Newton's third law, he states that every action has an opposite, yet equal reaction. Well, it actually states that for every external force that acts upon an object, there is a force of equal magnitude but opposite direction which acts back on the object that exerted the initial force. I start this video with this law because every action that you design in a game has not one set of reactions, but several, and the more of these reactions a designer thinks about, the more hidden gameplay elements arise, what we call emergent. Let's do an exercise I call design stories. The goal is to write a story about the consequences of an action that our player will be allowed to take in our game. As an example, let's take a story at random from my barbarian Roland here. Roland is walking down the street and sees a house sitting on stilts. For whatever reason, he decides to use his sledgehammer on the wooden supports on the east side of the house. The supports drop out and this sets off a chain of events. First, the house starts to lean and rock back and forth. Next, the family in the house will start to panic, and maybe make it out of the house in time, but as it leans, there's Stephanie, in her room upstairs. By the time she notices the house is lilting, it's too late. The house tilts so severely that she falls out the window and onto the ground, where the house promptly falls on her. Seeing this, and you standing in the road with your sledgehammer, the father charges you, and the mother goes off screaming, looking for a guard. The father AI knows to do this because Roland has been tagged as the person who destroyed their house. If Roland had done the smart thing, and ran away before anyone saw him, he would have gotten away with it. The AI doesn't know who committed what crime until the person who is responsible for it is within viewable range within a certain time limit, likely tied to a heat meter, not unlike the stars you might find in a Grand Theft Auto game. If the reputation is low in the city, they are more likely to be spotted. Roland kills the father easily, but with several bystanders watching, far too many to kill before guards arrive, Roland is forced to run. But now a bounty is out on him, a bounty that will never expire until that barbarian is dead, in prison, or has friends in the right places. Either result ends in a penalty to Roland's progress. Having friends in high places can determine whether guards steal everything you have or leave you with a lighter purse, whether you waste away for years in prison or get out with a slap on the wrist. Now that we have a design story, what we do is break down all the actions and reactions into a list. Only systems that make the cut go from the list and into the game, and you decide that only once you have figured out what the driving theme behind your game is. Once you know the theme, extraneous systems are easy to spot. By building a physics engine that forces objects to be acted upon by gravity, you are allowing the player to figure out how to use that system to their advantage. By building a system of destructible objects, you now have created a meta, just like the Barrelmancers of Divinity Original Sin. A player can now start using the collapsible building mechanic as a strategy for taking out whole families who work against him in the royal court. So how will I be using this trick of story-based design to make my game? Let's start with a question. How many times have you played an RPG, and in the middle of the quest, you decide to throw the game a curveball? Let's use our merchant and blacksmith example from part 1 of this series as a design story for our mechanics. What if our player took the plans of the merchant, but the merchant refused to buy them? Maybe the player's reputation is low or their charisma score is the equivalent of Tommy D. Simone.
But I'm funny how? I mean funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
Whatever the case may be, now he's stuck with plans that are worthless. Our player, though, knows that revenge is a dish best served ironically, and he has a perfect way of getting back at the merchant. He pickpockets him and plants the stolen plans on him.
A few moments later.
The blacksmith had put out a bounty earlier that morning, and now bounty hunters are searching everywhere for the plans. They're searching people on the streets and causing a general ruckus. The player manages to avoid them for a while, but eventually he runs into a group of the bounty hunters in the district. They tell the player to turn out their pockets. The player knows these guys will likely steal his money, as they have in the past. His action was theft, and the reaction is bounty hunters. The player weighs his options. There's no way he can kill all 5 men, but if he cooperates, they'll likely rob him. Maybe he can scream out for a nearby guard. It's risky, but he tries it anyway. The guard comes running and breaks up the hoodlums, and the player tells him about how he overheard the merchant talking about stealing the plans that the blacksmith is looking for. The merchant is arrested, and the player gets his revenge. This scene has a lot of components, so let's look at this list of actions and reactions. Again, actions are things the player can do, and reactions are ways the world reacts to those actions. Each action and reaction is a system that needs to be designed and developed. The key to making these systems viable within a budget and time constraint is in focusing only on the systems that have the most bang for our buck. The player action of screaming, for instance, has the benefit of drawing the attention of the guards. It can also be used as a quick distraction. The reaction of the world is to investigate the scream. And if the player is caught yelling fire when there is no fire, well, the end result is a fine. Every action should have a reaction. Stealing requires many state changes in the guard's patrol AI. For example, the AI would have to have a hearing distance. How far can they hear something clearly, as well as a mechanic for measuring how loud any given sound is. You would do this by classifying objects by their material and weight, and then coming up with reasonable distance for any combination. That keeps guards from storming from every corner of the map to investigate a sound. Also, we would need to account for how much sound is cut from the walls of buildings. After all, a guard inside a house might not hear a scream through a wall. You could even have modifiers in the option screen that turn a guard's hearing up to superhuman levels and watch as players torture themselves in YouTube clips. It literally markets itself! You also need a sight mechanic. Distance, which will vary from guard to guard depending on their level and perception. If they catch the player in the midst of a crime or have a bounty on their head, the guard will initiate a chase and dialogue. But uh-oh, I've created a problem here. The combination of randomness would create confusion in players. If they can't predict the guard's sight distance, they will think that the AI is broken. They would need a mini-map or a radar so that they could tell if someone's eyesight was really good. Now the question becomes, do I want UI clutter and players looking away from what's going on in the world? Or do I want something more elegant? How about instead of having a mini-map, we show how far a guard or bounty hunter can see with the toggling of a power, like thief vision, but without the weird screen filters. It shows the sight radius in red on the ground in front of the guard. There's all kinds of little tricks that you can use to message to the player that some guard will have better vision. This is just one of them, but I think you get the point. Whenever possible, we want to design our way out of design cliches. We want the level designers to have ultimate control over the difficulty and thus the rewards of any given district. And this is a good way to do it. It is also controllable by the player with sliders for guard sight and hearing. Variable difficulties are important, because while most games deal with difficulty on a very superficial level with players being able to take less hits but AI being able to take more, our game will fundamentally change the way the AI behaves. The difficulty comes from the AI being better at their jobs. Moving on to pickpocketing. True cause and effect requires guard AI to react to any action the player is allowed to take. The guard AI would be programmed to arrest any NPC or player if they knew that they had stolen items on them, whether they saw the player with the item in their hands or someone informs them that he does, like a bounty hunter. This also opens up a new dialogue branch in conversations with guards. That branch is for reporting crimes, but in order to succeed, our character will have to be pretty good bluffer if he is to convince the guards that upstanding residents are criminals and he's not. A system designed instead of a scripted event system allows both the stumbling upon a crime and planting evidence systems to work all the time without any event scripting on the part of the developer. The AI finds an NPC by tag and pathfinds its way to arrest a lawbreaker. I might hear some of you protesting now. What's to keep someone from pickpocketing the king and placing evidence on his person? Well, to avoid things like this, you can have another variable. Protected person would tell the guard AI that, even with evidence, there's no way they could arrest that person. This would keep governors, noble lords close to royalty, and kings and queens, and anyone the developer wishes to keep safe from being arrested. But I have to ask, why would anyone want to do this? A better way to balance this system is to make only the very valuable items markable as stolen because, let's face it, no one's going to notice a loaf of bread has been stolen. But a family heirloom's disappearance will be. This makes the player struggle with their choice. Do I use this item to frame somebody, or do I use it to fence it and buy better equipment? If you balance the economy in the game well and make money rare and valuable enough, as well as combat challenging enough, framing someone will be a significant investment for the player. Also, why should anyone other than the king be safe from a frame-up? If we're going for a game that truly frees the player up to play the way they wish, calling a choice is like chopping off a limb. If a player wants to go through the entire game framing people, why not let them? If that is fun and enjoyable to them, Why not let them have their fun? For an example of how letting a player exploit game systems can lead to player creativity, we need only look at Metal Gear Solid 5. This game inspires the player to think of ridiculous ways of subverting the systems and using them in crazy ways. It's a game where the player sneaks around inside a box, and because that is absurd, the natural thought that occurs to a player is, what other crazy thing can I do? It's a game that will allow you to put a smoke grenade in a Jeep, drive that Jeep past several guards who see a smoking vehicle and think, pretty normal, and extract the prisoner without anyone being wiser. Sure, it's an exploit, but it's the best kind of exploit. The kind that makes the player feel really smart for figuring it out. Think about calling down supplies in MGS5. Think about how you would feel if when you called down supplies and they landed on someone and knocked them out, only to find out that when you fight quiet and called down a drop on her head, but instead of knocking her out, it did nothing. Imagine how that would feel. We still have to finish the fight. We weren't clever. The event designer didn't think of this, and therefore we don't get to do it. Or as more often is the case, the designer did think of it and actively prevented us from doing anything about it. That doesn't sound very satisfying, does it? Thankfully, MGS5 doesn't do this, because it doesn't set your expectations then crush your hopes when you think that you figured out something clever. No, the game designer thought of that option, so they designed the AI to react to anything hitting them in the head. And that AI will react differently given the shape, size, and velocity of the projectile. Then they made dropping things on Quiet's head a win condition. Let's go back to our game for an example of how the framing system can be leveraged and exploited by the player. Imagine what it would be like if you had the entire town's worth of important people arrested by framing them for stealing and murder, and the only people that were left on the streets were peasants and guards. It wasn't easy, and you've been broke, hungry, and never got a moment's sleep, but you managed it. You could commit as many crimes as you wish because the guards couldn't arrest you. There's no more room in prisons. And those bounty hunters? You had their leader arrested first. That king is as good as dead. And once you take the throne, you, being a good and benevolent king, release the townspeople and become their savior. The game acknowledges you for your crafty ways with a cutscene. Now what would happen if I assassinate all the important noblemen? Or arrange marriages between them all? What if I frame someone, then break them out of prison to get them to like me? Or what if I just burn the whole damn place down? Replayability in abundance. This is how emergent gameplay is designed. It's emergent because it arises naturally from a system designed in a cause and effect structure, just like the structure of any good story. If you run down the list of player actions and start thinking of all the possibilities the system can be used for, you can make more intelligent decisions about how to prevent players from doing too much, while also developing fun systems to abuse that always have equal consequences. The player acts, and the world reacts. Now, this was a fun little exercise, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And make sure you post your own design story and the action and reaction breakdown in the comments below, or share them on Discord. Link is in the description. I did something a little different with this video. I spent a lot more time on the script, doing several passes and editing on this. 2 passes which were very nearly entire rewrites. I'm pretty happy with the results, but I want to know what you think. Do you like the direction that this channel's going in? Do you like these videos, the animation? Feed me your validation or scorn me with your rejections. Also, consider donating to the channel on Patreon. This has been a rant from Strat-edgy, and now that you heard it, go play some games.